Welcome everyone to this immigration and travel update hosted by the American Australian Association. I'm really thrilled to invite to have our two guest speakers, Dave Thomas from Qantas and Zjantelle, Cammisa Markel, our favorite immigration lawyer. Dave has been with Qantas for 5 years and previously had a long career with American Airlines. Welcome, Dave. Dave's going to give us an update that'll go for about 10 minutes. And then we want to thank you all for all of the questions that you've submitted. Dave has reviewed them all, and hopefully we'll cover all of the topics that you're interested in. And then we'll move on to updates from Zjantelle. He's got all the latest on visas and immigration, as well as some further updates, for example, travel in and out of Australia. So Dave, I'll hand it over to you, and a warm welcome. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Louisa. And nice to be here with everyone and meet you virtually. You know, it's really been great news a couple of weeks ago when the federal government in Australia agreed to open up the borders. And then what really made things happen for us at Qantas is when New South Wales and Victoria now have lifted the 14-day quarantine. So that's enabled us to fly. It's generated the demand that we needed and enabled all of you who are trying to get home to get back over to Australia. So we're really excited about that. Behind the scenes, the Qantas team has been working hard, and it's really nice to be working on something so positive after so many months. So I thought what I would do is discuss a couple of things. First, a little bit about what our travel plans are, what our flights are looking like the next few months. And then I'll also talk a little bit about what to expect when you get to the airport. So first of all, we are going to start flying on October 30th, this Saturday. So there's going to be 3 to 4 flights a week from LA to Sydney. It really depends on the week that we're flying as to how many we will have. We're also going to be restarting flights to Melbourne on December 18th, and also Vancouver and Honolulu will be December 18th as well. The Vancouver flight is good because some of you may know in the past, we've always operated just seasonal service. So in the northern winter, we'd have a few weeks of flying, and in the northern summer, we'd have a few weeks of flying to Vancouver. But now we're doing that year round, which is great. Give us a few more options into Canada from Australia. And then a lot of people have asked about our San Francisco service. That is coming back as well. Eventually, we plan on flying to Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney from San Francisco. Some of those flights will kick off mid-February of 2022, and then Dallas-Fort Worth is coming back as well, mid-February 2022. Now, I did just mention that we're starting up on October 30th. Originally, we announced that it would be November 1st, but just a few days ago, we decided to add an extra flight on October 30th. And the reason for that is when it leaves Los Angeles October 30th, it will arrive into Sydney at 6 a.m. on November 1st, right when the borders are opening. So we wanted to be the first one to land and be there when the borders open. So I mentioned that because some of you may have booked a few days later, maybe a week or two later. If you want to move up to that first flight, there are seats available. We welcome you to do that. With Qantas, we have a Fly Flex policy. So there's no fees to make changes to your tickets. So if you do want to move up, you can do it without a fee, no penalties. The only thing you might have to see is if there's any type of fare difference, but most likely there won't be any charge. We just switch up to that flight. So I encourage you to do so. It might be kind of neat to be on the first flight that lands in Australia when the border opens. The other thing I'll mention too is that all these flights are going to be operated by 787s, Dreamliners, on the LA flights. We've also announced that we're bringing some of the A380s back. Some of you may know we have 10 of them sitting out in the desert in California and Victorville. There's been a few news reports recently on those aircraft sitting out there. And originally we were going to keep them out there until the end of 2023, but now we've decided to move them up because of the demand we've seen. So in February of 2022, LA will get 2 A380s to Sydney, which is great news. It has a first class cabin. It's our only aircraft that does have first class. So we'll bring that back to North America. And then by November of next year, we'll bring 3 more back into service, and then hopefully have all of them back into service, all 10 of them by the beginning of 2024. So all these flights I've mentioned, they're out there, they're on sale. You can book them. As I mentioned, that Fly Flex policy is something we put in place just to make sure it's easy, because when you're dealing with vaccinations, testing, and other requirements, sometimes you'll have to make these changes, and sometimes at the last minute. So the Fly Flex policy allows you to change your flight last minute with no penalties. So keep that in mind if you need to change your flight or push things out. The other question I get asked a lot is the fares. If you some of you probably priced some of the tickets out there during the pandemic with the few carriers that were still operating, and they had to put them at extremely high rates because there were caps. So they can only carry like 20, 30 passengers. And so the fares were extremely high because of that. But now those caps are gone, so we can operate full flights. So you'll see a fare structure that's similar to what we had in place pre-COVID. And the fees and taxes, they haven't changed. So it'll be more of a normalized fare structure that you'll see, and hopefully be more affordable for all of you who are trying to get home. I'll talk a little bit now about check-in. What happens when you get to the airport, because that has changed a bit, of course, now with everything that's required. The one thing we're trying to do is work with IATA, which is the International Air Transport Association, and they have developed the Travel Pass app that Qantas has signed up for, as well as several other airlines signed up for, and other governments are recognizing it as well. So IATA is trying to develop more of a consistent electronic verification program for testing, for vaccines, and other things. So we hope to have that app up and running by mid to the end of November. And what will happen is you'll be able to securely upload your vaccination information to it and your testing information that can be shown to airline staff, border officials, or health officials as needed. So that should make things a lot easier. Problem is, it's not going to be ready for our initial flights. So in the beginning, it's going to be a manual process. You'll have to bring your travel and health documentation with you in person, and our check-in staff will have to verify it manually, which, as you can imagine, is probably going to take a bit longer. So you want to make sure you get there early if you're on some of those initial flights, because if we have a full flight, checking all that information is going to take a while. Another thing to keep in mind is these flights are only open to Australian citizens, residents, immediate family members, and their parents. And that's in line with the Australian government requirements. Now, we hope very soon to have it opened up to everybody, including Canadians and Americans. And we will be very vocal once that happens, because that's going to really change the dynamics of the demand and what flights we're operating. So you heard me mention we're staging a lot of our flights out. And a lot of it is predictions on our part of when we think the borders will open up to more people. So when it comes to the vaccine, we get a lot of questions about what vaccines are recognized. And so if you've been vaccinated in the US or Canada, you're going to most likely have received a vaccine that's recognized by Australia. So there's really no issue going into Australia. We've gotten the question about AstraZeneca vaccine in Australia that is recognized by the US. So again, that one's not an issue when you come back to the US as being recognized. The people who do not need to be vaccinated are basically just children 11 years old or under. So you have to be under 12, or you can try to get a exemption from the Australian government. Now, to do that, you have to go to smarttraveler.gov.au. And there's a link there for you to apply for that exemption. It's sort of out of the hands of Qantas. If you don't have that exemption and you're not vaccinated, we won't be able to board you. So keep an eye on that. And really that website is key to a lot of information. If you're wondering where to go for information about the Australian border, that website is going to be your best resource. The other big thing that's really important is the testing. So testing is required on both ends within 72 hours of your flight. And you have to have a negative COVID-19 test, and it has to be from an approved PCR testing site. So what'll happen is 7 days before your flight, you're going to get some information from Qantas in both text message as well as email that will give you some links. It'll give you a bunch of information on what documentation you need to have and where to get it prepared. So what some of those testing sites would be, and other information that'll help you prepare for boarding the flight. Then 3 days before departure, you'll get another text message and email from us with similar information, but this time it'll be a reminder that, hey, you've got to go out and get your COVID test now because we're within 72 hours of your flight. And then 1 day before departure, you'll get another one with, again, those same reminders and just more information about how you can check in and just verifying that you have all the information needed. The other thing we're doing, the other issue too is going beyond Sydney or Melbourne, whether you can travel to other states. And really, it depends on the state. There's a lot of different border controls set up within Australia, as many of you know. So all the states have their different requirements. So it's, if you do want to travel to another state beyond Victoria or New South Wales, you need to check what the state border guidelines are, and those seem to change on a regular basis. We won't be able to sell tickets to other states unless the border restrictions are lifted. The other thing is many of you might be traveling from other places besides LA. And so we've worked pretty closely with our partners in North America, so Alaska Airlines and American Airlines. And so they're both aware of the opening of the borders, and American does plan to start flying there soon. So that will help transfer a little bit easier through LA on one seamless ticket if you're connecting from other destinations. So that's most of it. I mean, it's the one point I'd really like to make, though, is this seems to be changing daily. And you see me looking at notes, and part of that is because just a few hours ago, I got some updates on some of this stuff. So it is changing, and that's why we're sending those 3 emails and text messages to all our travelers, just to make sure that if there are any changes, our travelers are aware of it. So I really encourage everybody to make sure to keep an eye on those on the website, the smarttraveler.gov.au, for changes in Australia. And in the US side, the CDC website is the best source of information for border control in the US. So if you go on the CDC website under coronavirus, they have an international travel link, and you can click on there to find out information about traveling to Australia. So when you get to the airport, many of the airports, especially LAX, has been flying a lot of international flights and domestic flights for quite some time. So the cleanliness, the hand sanitizing stations, they're all over there. It's very safe already. So there's not a lot that we had to do at LAX to prepare the airport for traveling. The one thing is our lounge in LA is not open yet. It's been closed to the pandemic. And whenever you're serving food, it takes quite a while to get the lounge back up and running. So it's probably going to be down for the next 3 or 4 months until we can get everything in place with the city of Los Angeles. So in the meantime, we'll trying to get some other options. We always have our partner, American Airlines. Their Admirals Club is located in Terminal 4, which is the next terminal over from Tom Bradley. You can walk over there once you pass security. We're also trying to make some other arrangements in Tom Bradley. So if you want to use the lounge when you get there, just check with the staff and they'll direct you to what options we have there. And then on board, we are going to provide everyone with a little wellness kit that has a mask in it. It has some sanitizing wipes, a few other things to help you on the flight. We do ask, just as it's actually required by all carriers to mandate masks being worn in flight, unless you are eating or drinking. So you want to keep in mind as well. The other question gets asked a lot is about the air in the airplanes. It's safe to breathe that airplane with all those people on it. And so one thing we have on Qantas and Jetstar, for that matter, we have hospital grade HEPA filters. And what they do is they circulate the air, and it takes 99.9% of the particles out of the air, including viruses. And we recycle that air every 5 minutes. So the air is very safe, very clean. It's probably a lot safer, a lot cleaner than what you'd experience in the airport or maybe even outside. So that should bring some comfort to the safety on board when traveling. So I'll leave it there. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's booked your flights back. As I mentioned, the team at Qantas is really excited. We're geared up to flying, and it's nice to have so much positive energy at the airline right now. I'm going to be out there on Saturday, October 30th. So if any of you are flying then, I'll be around next week at the airport. Make sure you come up and introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you in person and chat with you then. So thanks again for allowing me to join you today.
Oh, Dave, thanks so much. That was a really awesome update. And I just feel so positive about everything that you've said. Travel for the last 17 or 18 months has just seemed like such an abstract concept. And so for you to give some real information and updates is so welcome. And I really want to express my gratitude. And I look forward to seeing you on a Qantas flight very soon. Hopefully something to look forward to for everybody for the holidays. I also wanted to remind everyone that the Qantas website is I assume, being updated continually with all of this information that you've shared. And
yeah, it is.
attendees
And that'll be part of the information we send to the travelers before their flights is links to the site, to the Qantas.com site.
Okay, all right. Well, that's great. Thank you again. And now over to Zjantelle for some other exciting updates as the country reopens. There's a lot of news to share on your part as well. So Zjantelle, I invite you to start your presentation and share your screen.
Hi, Louisa. Just want to say hello. And also, David, that was so good. I have a feeling that there is no one watching right now and that they're all frantically on their computers trying to book to be on that very first flight, because I'm sure that flight is going to be filled with streamers and champagne, right? Everyone wants to be that first person on that flight. So anyone watching the recording, I'm sure you've probably missed out by now. But so if you've already booked, come back on this webinar now so that you can listen to the immigration updates. And I will try and share my screen and come to our slides, traditional format again. Louisa, we tried to cover material from all the questions that you got in and tried to format our slides around those to answering those questions. So let me go to sharing my screen. Fabulous. Okay, so I just wanted to remind people of topics that we've previously covered in detail. For some of the people that did have questions on these topics, furlough and unpaid leave, we didn't have too many on that anymore, but just wanted people to know about it. That's an old webinar. Long dated I-94s and just filing a new LCA if you're on an E3. We did have a few questions on that, but I didn't want to cover that again because we've covered it numerous times in previous webinars. So anyone that is interested in that can go to that webinar. RFEs with respect to filing an I-129 with your E3. We covered that in good detail. Green card holders outside of the US wanting to come back. We did get a lot of questions on that again. And even though we've covered that before, I'm just going to do a quick reminder on that tonight. E3 premium processing, I'm not going to go into the depths of that tonight because we did go through that earlier this year. And then earlier this year, we did do a reminder to people on what they put on their social media, just because now when you fill out your DS-160 and so forth, people are, USCIS is looking you up, Googling you before you go to visa appointments and so forth. So just to be mindful of that. All right, so tonight, what are we discussing? Visa revalidation is a really cool thing that I've realized over the summertime this year, when a lot of people attempted to travel or wanted to go on vacation, that a lot of people didn't know about it. The fact that they could actually travel to Canada or Mexico, even with an expired visa. So I'm going to go over that because that's something that people could still use and take advantage of. Want to touch on the green card lottery. It's open right now. So a reminder on that. Green card holders outside the US, just a quick recap on that. H-1B portability provision. I want to cover this tonight because I've seen a few cases where people applying for an E3 through an I-129 were told that the H-1B portability provision applied and it doesn't. So I just want to make sure our viewers know that to avoid any, pits and falls, traps and falls. I'm like the wrong analogy here. COVID-19 vaccine is now required for green card medicals. So we'll touch on that. EAD processing times, we had a few questions on those. So we'll do a quick recap on that. The biggest news right now, which is that this travel ban that's been in place for the last 18 months from the UK, Ireland, all the Schengen countries, India, Iran, South Africa, Brazil, China, is being lifted as of November 8th, which is like, hallelujah. Travel to Australia, which David covered most of it. So you'll be able to see it on a slide, but I think we'll just skip over that really quick. And then lastly, those $1 million questions of where can I get an E3 visa right now if I wanted to do it in Australia or if I wanted to do it outside of Australia. So we'll go over those too. All right, so what is this visa revalidation thing? And I can travel to Canada or Mexico, even though my visa's expired. What did you say? So what it is there is this thing called visa revalidation, which means that if you have if your visa and your passport's expired, but your I-94 is still valid, then you can travel to either Canada or Mexico, and only those two places because they're contiguous territory to the United States, with your expired visa and your valid I-94, and get back in, as long as that trip is less than 30 days. So if you, the other requirement is that you cannot have applied for a visa during this time that your I-94 is longer than your visa. You cannot have tried to apply for a visa and had a visa denied, or have a visa application pending. And that includes if you have started the DS-160 process for a visa application. So where you couldn't use it is if you said, well, I'm going to try and get an appointment, visa appointment in Mexico or Canada, and I'm going to submit my DS-160, try and get an appointment, and then you don't get an appointment, but you've submitted your DS-160, you wouldn't then be able to go on vacation and take advantage of this visa revalidation. So you want to just be careful about the way you use it. But if you haven't done that and you really just want to go on a vacation right now, but your visa is expired, there are some ways that you can do that by going to Canada or Mexico. Mexico has some beautiful beaches. And we've had some clients that have really taken advantage of this and traveled to Mexico a few times, not even to do their visa necessarily, because they were on an E2, which as an Australian, they could not do in Mexico and they have to do in Australia, but they really wanted a family vacation. So they were able to take advantage of this visa revalidation. So the types of people that can take advantage of this are, so that you know, is this me? Is this including me? So if you're on an E3 and your visa expired, but you have a long dated I-94, you could take advantage of this. You want to make sure you have a valid LCA though. If you have an expired E3 visa in your passport, but you applied for an I-129, either extension or new employer, new petition for a new employer, and that petition got approved. So now you have an I-797 approval notice with a new I-94 at the bottom, but you still don't have the visa stamp in your passport. Those people, their visas expired, but they have a valid I-94 because of the new I-94 at the bottom of their 797. Those people could take advantage of this visa revalidation. E2 visa holders typically have long dated I-94s. That's why it happens in the E3, because often the Customs and Border Patrol officers at the airport get the E3 confused with E2 and give people 2 years from the date of entry. E2s always get 2 years on their I-94 from the last entry. So even if they entered in a week before their visa expired, they'll have an I-94 that lets them stay here for 2 years. And the other categories that can benefit from this are F1 visa holders, J1 visa holders, because their I-94 says DS on it, which is duration of stay. So they could actually leave and come back. Just a reminder that the trip does have to be less than 30 days. And only Canada and Mexico are the places that you can go. Okay. So another reminder I wanted to give people was the Green Card Diversity Lottery. So the Green Card Lottery is open right now. So if you want to apply for the lottery, do it before November 9th is when it closes at noon. Try not to leave it till the 7th, 8th, 9th because the website gets really congested and then you get really frustrated and then you like want to get really upset at the system. So try and do it early to save yourself that aggravation. The website right here in blue is the dvprogram.state.gov. That is the only website you should go to apply for this. Anything else is a spam website. And if they ask you to pay a fee at all, that is also a scam. So you should not be paying any fee. It is 100% free to apply. The thing where I see people get caught up every year once they find out that they won the Green Card Lottery and they get notified is if they applied, but they weren't actually allowed to apply. I want to remind people that it's not based on you don't apply based on your country of nationality. You apply based on your country of birth. So for example, if you're an Australian citizen, but you were born in India, or you were born in the UK, you were born in Philippines, you have an Australian passport, so you're like, I'm an Australian citizen, I can apply, you actually can't, because it is based on the place you were born. And we've seen clients that are, oh, I won the green card lottery. And then we look and they were born in one of these places, and it's like, oh, and it's really heartbreaking, because if they haven't heard it from us beforehand, they're hearing it for the first time when they go to their green card interview, and they're getting so excited to get that green card. And then they get to the interview and the officer is like, oh, well, you actually don't qualify. So just don't experience that heartbreak. Any questions around
yes,
that?
there were a few questions from our audience on that. One question is, if you are an E3 holder, or if you're going to apply for an E3, can you still enter the DV lottery?
Absolutely. So I think that's I get that question all the time, Louisa. So this is a really good question. I have so many clients that are like, oh, no, I have never applied because I think you can't, because the E3 is a non-immigrant intent visa. They're right that the E3 is a non-immigrant intent visa. However, you can apply for the green card lottery. We have had many clients do it and thereafter apply for an E3 and it never be an issue. You just want to be cautious that when you are then later applying for your E3 visa, if it does come up, it's often you are applying for this green card lottery, not even necessarily with that exact intent that you necessarily want to immigrate to the US. It's just opening up your opportunities. Also, it's not guaranteed that you're going to win, so a lot of people apply. I've had so many people apply, win, and then never even use it, right? So there's a good example of someone that applied but didn't necessarily have immigrant intent. So definitely I encourage all my clients, even if they're on an E3, if they are interested in never maybe one day having a green card, applying to apply. I do encourage them to apply.
And then aside from the E3, Emma from Canberra wanted to know, what about other visa categories? Like if you're on an L1, should you apply? Can you apply?
Emma, yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're on an L1, then you have absolutely nothing to worry about, because on an L1, you're allowed to have immigrant intent even. And in fact, the benefit of applying, if you're here in the US for the green card lottery on an L1, is that if you win and you're on an E3, then when you get to the point where you're applying for adjustment of status, you're going to have a period where you won't be able to travel internationally until you get your travel document, which right now is taking about 8 months. But if you're an L1, it's one of the categories that if you win the green card lottery and you apply to get the green card from within the US, which is called adjustment of status. The other way is by doing consular processing, which means going back to Australia for your green card interview. I recommend that if you are in the US, you do adjustment of status. Then you actually will be able to, you will never have that restriction of no international travel on when you apply for the adjustment of status, because the L visa has that dual intent. So there's actually a benefit if you're on L visa, or even on an H1B, actually, the same rule applies, to apply for the green card lottery. And likewise, if you're on an O, F, any visa here, you should not be afraid to apply for the green card lottery.
Okay, so on green cards, by far the question that we most commonly get when, not just for this webinar, but for the past 2 or 3 webinars, these updates that we've done are from green card holders who are stuck outside of the US. And hopefully, those people take some comfort from Dave's update about Qantas, that planes are at least in the air again. But Zjantelle, what other updates can you give us on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go to that. One thing I wanted to just remind people about the green card lottery is if you're married, get your spouse to apply too, because you get double the chances. Because if either spouse wins, then both of them get a green card. So that, I just wanted to remind about that. But thank you. And then going back to green cards, if you're outside of the US. So there's been so many questions about this and so much anxiety from people, even though we've covered this in so many webinars to try and make people feel really comfortable with the fact that they will be able to board their flight. And I'm sure David has many situations where people have been able to board, even if they have been out of the US for a significant amount of time. What we'll deal with mainly is people that have been out more than a year. But if it's the case that you've been out less than 180 days, you should try to come back so you preserve your ability to apply for citizenship without any issues. If it's more than 180 days that you've been out, but less than 365 days. Again, if you want to preserve your ability to apply for citizenship, better to come back before that 365 days. But if you, okay, most of the people, people that are most anxious right now are those people that have been there more than a year, or it's edging on 18 months. And, you know, we did this update when it was around about the year mark, and now we're closer to the 18-month, post 18-month mark. And I'm still going to say the same thing. Still try to come. You do not need to apply for the SB returning resident visa, because as David might be able to even back up, you know, the airlines have been instructed to board green card holders. So if you've been out more than a year, we are trying to encourage our clients to show that this is more for when you're boarding, or when you're also, you're going to have to apply for the exemption to leave Australia still anyway, right? And in applying for that exemption, you need to show that you've got ties to the US. Bring those with you as well. So then when you enter the US, when you're going, you potentially will be taken into secondary inspection, because they're going to say, oh, you've been gone more than a year, we want to take you into secondary inspection. And all they're going to do is check that you really do still have ties here, or that you really do want to be coming back. Every client that has been in secondary inspection has always been let in. So that's something that's comforting. And just if they say, well, you've been out more than a year, really, you've given up your green card, you should give up your green card, sign this 407, just never sign a 407, because then you're not ever obliged to, you don't have to, and they're obliged to actually let you in. So if you get on the plane and you get here, just know you're getting in. So that is very comforting, hopefully, to our green card holders that are outside the US. So with respect to boarding the flight, and David, you feel free to chime in here at any point if you've seen any anecdotes here or situations. But generally, CBP has guided the airlines and has said to them, you know, you have to let someone on, and they have this exact memo that says you have to let on someone with if they have an unexpired green card, even if they've been out more than a year, you have to let them on. If they have a re-entry permit, you have to let them on. If they have an expired green card, you still have to let them on. Expired permanent resident cards with a sticker or with an I-90 receipt that shows that you were trying to apply for your extension or renewal of your green card have to be let on. The trickiest one is like if you're a expired conditional resident. Conditional resident is the group of people that get a green card valid only 2 years, because they got their green card based on marriage to a US citizen. At the time of their interview, they were married less than 2 years, so they get a green card that's only valid for 2 years. And then at the 2-year mark, they have to file to remove the conditions on their green card. As long as they have done that and they have the receipt to that, then they can come in with their expired conditional green card together with that receipt notice that they filed that document. So if when you arrive and you have any difficulty boarding and you do have this green card, the airline should be contacting the RCLG, Regional Carrier Liaison Group. And I don't know if you have any experience with this, David, and you want to chime in, please feel free to. We have had a client that of probably about 20 clients that we've had that we know of that were outside of the US for more than a year on their green cards, who have had zero issues coming in, boarding the plane, getting in, going through secondary inspection, getting in to the US. We had one client that did have a little bit of difficulty, and I'm going to share the experience just so that people know that they still did make it and get on the flight eventually. So if you're getting resistance and pushback initially, don't give up. This client arrived, and this was at the beginning. So I think that now, definitely, I think airlines have, become more attuned to these, that permanent residents should be let on the plane. But one client arrived, and the airline had said, and it wasn't Qantas, by the way, had said, you've been out more than a year, we're not going to board you. And so the client, obviously called us in a major frantic panic. We got on the line. They said, we need this from RCLG, and RCLG's not picking up, blah, 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 blah. In the end, they ended up just trying a different airline, which was, we said, why don't you buy a ticket to a different airline, see what happens there, then get that ticket refunded or otherwise, So they actually bought a ticket to another airline and just glided right through. The airline let them on. They got on the plane. They came. They went through immigration, and actually they didn't even get stopped in secondary inspection. They just breezed right on through. So that's just a story of just not to be scared or worried, because you're going to get in. You're going to get in. All right, I wanted to cover the H1. I wanted to cover this because I've seen some disasters come our way in the last month, which I think the reason I'm seeing an increase in this is because of premium processing becoming available for the E3s has encouraged more Australians to file for a change of employer petition from within the US. Because before, when there was no premium processing, filing an I-129 change of employer for your E3 within the US was not really realistic, because you could not start working for the new employer until your petition is approved. And it was taking like 8 months. So when premium processing became available for the E3s, more Australians said, oh, I can file this premium processing and I'm going to file for my change of employer and so forth. What I started to see recently is clients that came to me with either a denied I-129 or an I-129 that had a request for evidence on it. And what had happened was they had been advised, because the E3 visa was set up based on the H-1B provisions, and a lot of the E3 is very similar to an H-1B. Most notably is the section around specialty occupation, that you need to have a degree for this in a specific field for the job that you're doing. And many people, we spoke about this, the RFE with respect to specialty occupation. But now I'm seeing RFEs around people starting their job with their new employer when the petition was filed, rather than waiting for the approval. And it was because they were given the advice that it follows the rules of the H-1B. So on an H-1B visa, if you're on an H-1B and you file a new petition with a new employer, you're actually allowed to start working for that new employer the day your petition is filed. You do not have to wait for it to be adjudicated or approved. So the benefit of for those people is that they never have to really bother filing for premium processing unless they want to travel. The information that some E3s holders have been getting is that, oh, the E3s follow the rules of the H-1B, so you can start working for your new employer the day your petition is filed. And then they're getting an RFE at some point that also says, we want to see that you've been maintaining your status. And then what we were seeing is that when they're asking for you to show evidence you've been maintaining your status, they're asking for evidence of your pay stubs up until the date of filing. And we saw some people responding to the RFEs with pay stubs up until the date of filing, but then pay stubs up until the date of the RFE, which included pay stubs from the new employer. So then the I-129 was getting denied because the USCIS was saying, well, actually the H-1B provisions do not apply here, and you've started working illegally now for your new employer. And we've seen new RFEs that are still pending that have that. And I've said to those people, you absolutely can't respond with your pay stubs of your new employer. You've started working for this new employer. We need to fix this immediately. You want to fix it before you hit the 180-day mark. So if you get a denial based on this, from the date of denial, you are accruing unlawful stay. If you accrue 180 days of unlawful stay, then you are inadmissible to the United States for 3 years. So if you leave the US and try to come back, you're not going to be able to come back for 3 years without getting a waiver approved. If it hits 365 days of unlawful stay, then you're inadmissible for 10 years before you can come back. So the consequences of this can be pretty drastic. So when I started seeing multiple instances of this, I was like, oh my God, we got to cover this in our webinar to make sure that anyone that's told, like, yes, don't worry, you can start working for your new employer as soon as we file, that's not the case. Okay. Oh, another thing I wanted to bring up as well, another misconception is that a lot of people think that once they get their E3 approved in the US and they have that 797 approval notice, that they can just go to the consulate with that approval notice and get the visa put in their passport. For e-visa category visas, and this is also for the E2, because I had a client recently that had an E2 approved through USCIS and thought she could just go to a consulate with her approval notice. So all the E-class of visas, you cannot just go to the consulate with your approval notice, get the visa put in your passport. You actually have to do the whole visa application from scratch again when you're going to the consulate. So for E3s and or E2s, if that doesn't, so you need to take an LCA. You could take the old LCA that you used for that I-129, but then you're only getting the time that's left on that was on that LCA. So I always encourage people, when you go in a consular process, take a brand new LCA that's valid for a brand new 2-year period, make that application again so you get a fresh 2 years as well. Okay, what are we up to now? Oh, COVID vaccine now required for green card medicals. For those of our clients that are applying for green cards, whether it's through marriage to a US citizen, marriage to a green card holder, or through employment, part of the process of getting a green card is that you need to do a green card medical. You need to show that you do not have a communicable disease of public health significance. So COVID-19 is clearly a communicable disease of public health significance. So they said, if you have COVID-19, you can't get a green card. So they have now mandated that you have the vaccine after October 1st, 2021. You need to show that you've been vaccinated against COVID-19. We have there just a little preview of what the 693 form, which is the one that the doctor fills out, has on it now, says, has this person been vaccinated? The only people that can get away with not being vaccinated is if it's not age appropriate, so 11 and under, like David had said for the airline. If it's, you have a medical condition that doesn't allow you to get vaccinated, or if it's not routinely available where you're applying for the green card, or if there's a limited supply. So this is also only required for people who submitted their medical after October 1, 2021. So we very likely have listeners and people watching tonight that might be in the green card process now that all have already submitted their green card medical. If you submitted it before October 1, then you do not need to go and get a new one done, showing that you're vaccinated. But as long as it was signed by the doctor 30 days before you filed your case. But if you are now in the green card process and about to do your medical, just make sure that the surgeon, the medical examiner that's doing your green card medical has the correct form that completes that you are vaccinated through COVID-19. Okay, so we had quite a few questions about the processing time of EADs. They're still delayed, unfortunately. We thought that it would really speed up once they got rid of the biometrics requirement for a lot of the EADs in the category, or for the other categories like 539s no longer need biometrics. So we thought it would speed up the EADs, but we're still seeing significant delays. We do see it faster if you're getting your EAD based. Usually people are getting an EAD based on being a derivative visa holder that allows them to apply for an EAD. So E3D, so spouses of E3s, spouses of Ls, spouses of E2s, spouses of H1Bs in certain categories of H4, not all, J2s, spouses of J1s. So those people, if you've actually gone and got the derivative visa and come back, those EADs are taking faster than if you're doing it from within the US with a 539. Back in one of our other webinars, we did mention that they're thinking of doing premium processing for the EADs, and they had announced that back in February that they were thinking of it, but it still is not in place. So I get a lot of questions about that. Can I premium process this now? Has that come about yet? I know you mentioned it. Is it available now? It's still not available, and it's still not available to the 539s and for the multinational manager green card cases as well. So those were all categories that they said we're going to bring out premium processing for these categories, but they just still haven't yet. They did do the E3 premium processing, but the others not yet. So we're still waiting on that. We hope to have an update on that at some point. So what I want to actually, if I just go back to that, what people need to take away from this is if you are an E3D or an L2 spouse or an spouse of an E2 holder, you still want to be thinking about renewing your visa really in advance, and more than 6 to 8 months in advance right now. Which the unfortunate aspect of that is that you're cutting your visa, instead of being a 2-year visa or however length, 3 years for the L's and so forth, you're now cutting 6 months off of that. But if you don't want to have a break in employment, then you want to be doing that. Similarly, the other category of people that need to pay attention to this are people that are applying for green cards and are currently in a visa category that might expire once they've filed their adjustment of status application together with their application for an EAD card. You want to make sure your underlying non-immigrant status still has at least 8 months on it at the time you apply for your adjustment of status, so that you're going to have a smooth transition of always being able to work until you get that EAD card, and you're not going to have a gap of employment. So those are the people that need to be cautious too. If you're applying for a green card, or if you need to renew in a non-immigrant category and you're the spouse, dependent spouse that needs an EAD. All right. This is the big, really awesome news for so many people that have been wanting to go to Europe and the UK and Ireland and Brazil and India and so forth. We have had this travel ban in place for over 18 months now, since March of 2020, where you could not travel from the UK, Ireland, any of the Schengen countries, which is most of Europe, Iran, Brazil, India, South Africa, China. If you couldn't travel directly from there to the US, you had to spend at least 14 days somewhere else to be able to come back in, or you had to get a national interest exemption, an NIE approved, to be able to travel directly back. And those NIEs were like a nightmare, Louisa. They were so difficult to get because a lot of you had to apply at a consulate abroad. Some consulates were quick and would give them out in 2 days, and some would be 120 days. So the alternative is that you could request one from the airport, CBP at the airport. But then the CBP at the airport said, well, in the latest times, they had said, we're not going to entertain one until your request with the consulate's been pending at least 30 days. So it became this juggling act of trying to get people back into the country. And there were a lot of clients that actually didn't even know, well, not even clients, but just Australians that were traveling on an E3 or O1. And, then next thing you know, I've got a call from Europe saying, I'm trying to get on my flight. I can't get back from Italy. They're not letting me on the flight. Apparently there's some travel ban. And then we had to jump through hoops to try and get them back in the country. So this travel ban is lifting on November 8th, which is awesome. In place of this travel ban, people will need to show that they are vaccinated. They will need to still show that they have proof of a negative COVID test taken within 3 days of travel, regardless of their vaccination status. So foreign nationals will need to show that they're vaccinated, but that's not, so a lot of our clients ask, well, if I'm vaccinated, then I probably don't need to get the COVID test, right? Because I'm vaccinated. That's not the case. So even if you're vaccinated, and you're going to have to be vaccinated as a foreign national to enter the US, you also still have to get that COVID test 3 days, and it needs to be negative before you enter the US. CDC and the US defines vaccinated as 2 weeks after the last required dose. It's interesting because Australia says it's 6 or 7 days after the last dose. So just to note that the US requires it to be at least 2 weeks after you've gotten the last dose of the vaccine. What are we waiting on still with respect to this is, what documentation you'll need to show, probably your vaccine card. What about so this is for foreign nationals that need to show that they're fully vaccinated to get back in the country. But what about if you're a US citizen or green card holder, will you have to show that you're fully vaccinated? They haven't said for that category yet, but I believe that it most likely will be very similar. And then just a reminder that this travel ban is still in place until November 8th, which is exactly 2 weeks from today. So if you're planning to travel to Europe or any of these places anywhere in the next 2 weeks, just know that the fastest you'll be able to come back unless you already have an NIE that issued from previously, is going to be November 8th, because getting an NIE to get back in generally is taking more than 2 weeks to get. So don't think that, just a reminder, you can't right now fly to Europe or UK or South Africa or any of these places and think you're going to go there for 5 days and come back right now. November 8th will probably be the soonest you can come back. So just keep that in mind. So travel to Australia, David covered most of this, which is really great. So as a reminder, you know, at November 1st, New South Wales and Victoria will accept fully vaccinated Australian citizens. If you are not Australian, so you're the spouse of an Australian or the child of an Australian, we have a lot of Australians here who have had kids here who are babies and have an American passport but don't have an Australian passport yet. Just know that those people still do need to go on and apply for their spouse to get the approval, or their child, their non-Australian relative, to get the approval to enter. And similarly, the exemption to leave Australia is still in place. So just remember that as well. You know, they've said that should lift hopefully in November. David, I'm not sure. I think you thought maybe even December that the travel exemption to leave Australia will still be in place till.
Yeah, we feel pretty confident that hopefully December, and that's why we've added the flights December 18th. And you know, worst case scenario would be February of next year, where we have even more flights coming in.
Great. So just as a reminder to all those people that booked for that first flight landing November 1st in Australia, if you plan to come back before this requirement to get an exemption, you know, is lifted, you're going to have to apply for the exemption to come back. It's fine. You will qualify. You just need to show evidence that you do have ties to the US. We can help you if you get stuck with that at all. We've been helping a lot of our clients with the permits to get their relatives into Australia and exemptions to get out of Australia. So if you get stuck on it, you can do it on your own. If you can't, we're definitely happy to help. But just as a reminder, you know, the tough part is just being able to travel between states is the tough part. So and a reminder to people, we had a client, and this goes back to securing that, which is the next topic of getting a visa in Australia. And I'm speeding up here because I know I'm conscious of time. But if you live in, and David did touch on this, so you can, while you can fly into New South Wales and Victoria, it's tough. You can't travel into South Australia, you know, and the other states right now until they allow you to. So I had a couple of clients say, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fly into New South Wales or Victoria, and then I'm going to just be there for 14 days. And after the 14 days, I'll go on to Queensland, or I'll go on to you know, Adelaide after the 14 days. Well, it doesn't work that way. Until the states allow interstate travel, it's not like you've served your quarantine in that state by not quarantining in that state, because it's really the travel restriction of interstate travel. So if you wanted to get to South Australia right now, you still need to do the two. I think South Australia is trialing home quarantine, which I know you have some comments on that, Louisa. But you know, you still, whatever state you're going into, you still have to be mindful of that state. So you know, I'll give an example. My grandpa passed away, and I was not able to go back. And it's, you know, I've been dealing with a lot of our clients recently. And then when you experience it firsthand, you like realize that this is so crazy. If he passed away next week and he lived in New South Wales, I'd be able to go to the funeral. But if he passed away next week and he's in South Australia where he was, I still wouldn't be able to go. So people just have to realize that just because New South Wales and Victoria are open to no quarantine doesn't mean you can get to the other states with no quarantine. So this wraps back around to securing a visa in Australia. The awesome thing about New South Wales and Victoria opening is that now people from the US can fly to New South Wales and Victoria to go do their visa. The mail-in is still an option as well. But while you're there, you can't just go to visit your relatives in another state after you've done your visa before you come back. So just keep mindful of that, each of the state borders. During, you know, why this is so great that this has opened up, you know, was the last few months, Louisa, have been particularly tough for people living in New South Wales to get an E3 or any visa to get to the US because of the lockdown there, Sydney Consulate wasn't processing any visas. Melbourne and Perth were, but you couldn't get to Melbourne and Perth. So for the last few months, the only people that were easily able to get, if you didn't qualify for mail-in, the only people that could easily get a visa in Australia were people that were in Melbourne and Perth. Everyone else couldn't get to Melbourne and Perth. So now at least people in New South Wales can get to Melbourne because Melbourne has earlier appointments than Sydney right now. So if you need to get here in a hurry, you could at least travel and do that. That's opened up. But what people need to be conscious of if they're in South Australia, what the good thing is now is that you could travel from South Australia to Queensland or any of these other states to not Queensland, New South Wales or Victoria. Do your visa there. You still can't travel to Perth. You can travel to Victoria or New South Wales, do your visa, and then fly directly to the US from there. So what we were having to do for a lot of people was get them an appointment outside of Australia because they couldn't travel between states in Australia to get their visa. So we were having to find appointments en route to the US, so Dubai and Singapore and so forth. But now you will be able to go to Victoria or New South Wales to get your visa and then just fly out. And just remember, you can't then go back to South Australia or Queensland or Northern Territory or Perth or Tasmania to then pack up your things after you got the visa. You'll have to go get the visa and then leave directly from there. Okay, the pros and cons. I think David covered these already. Prices are coming down because of availability, and the cons is just still that there's these quarantines and inability to travel to your home state if it's not Victoria and New South Wales. Visas outside of Australia, these are the same sort of thing. The great thing about that travel ban ending is that now we should have more availability at all the consulates in Europe. Those should open up after November 8th. A lot of those weren't processing visa appointments specifically because of the travel ban, actually. So, for example, Athens was saying, we're not going to give you, unless you're exempt from the travel ban and you're married to a US citizen or have a US citizen child or so forth, those people they were granting appointments to. But if you weren't exempt, they were saying, we're not giving appointments out. So maybe somewhere like Athens might open up now because there's no travel ban and give Australians visa appointments. So we should be seeing more countries open up for availability for E3s to be able to do it closer to the US rather than flying back to Australia. So that's really awesome. Consulates that we've been able to get, so it is a moving target right now still for consulate availability of where you can get visas. So places we've been able to get people in the current times are Madrid, which is one in Europe, but they were actually processing E3s, Bogota in Colombia, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Mexico, Panama, Bahamas, Chile. You see the list. Any questions, Louisa? I think we have about 1 minute.
For each of you, I've got a quick question for you, Zjantelle, and one for Dave. For you, Zjantelle, is my visa going to get processed if I go somewhere like Doha? Will they know what to do? That's a question from Philip from Sydney.
Okay, awesome. That's a great question. So the good thing to know is that if you show up at a consulate and they accept you for your E3 visa appointment, even if they don't know what to do, they have to figure out what to do, because consulates have been told that if you show up there, they have to try and process the visa. They can't say, we're not processing you, because then that's a waste of government resources. So we have a couple, and you know what the thing is, like there's a lot of consulates that you would think know what to do, and then suddenly, you get a consular officer that's never experienced an E3 before. And I'll give an example of that. So, well, a couple of examples that have happened recently. So we've had processed numerous E3s in Dubai. We had a client recently go there, so we routed him out of Australia through Dubai, and then the consular officer started to think it was an E2 and said, oh, this is supposed to be submitted beforehand and this and that, and sent him off on his way and said, we can't process this. It's going to take us like a week or two before we can look at it. We contacted the consulate and said, no, this is an E3, and it got resolved, but he got an officer that didn't know what that person was doing. Another example was we have for years, even pre-pandemic, processed E3s in Bogota because we have a client who's married to a Colombian. woman, and he always wants to process his E3 in Bogota. So we know that Bogota, when Bogota became available, we were like, awesome, we've done so many E3s in Bogota. They know what they're doing there. And then in the pandemic, it was like, oh, we've never seen these. And so I think the tale of it is that the consulates, the American staff does rotate out after there's certain periods of posts there for 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and then they rotate out. So you might have had a consul, you might have a new consular officer that just got stationed at that post that doesn't know what they're doing. So I think if you're at a post where it's some obscure place, if they say, oh, we've never seen one of these before, ask, is there any MAT supervisor that might know of maybe another consular officer who's dealt with an E3 before, or, you know, you just know that they will deal with it and process it, and they will figure it out because that's what they have to do. So that's my tale on if you guys.
Okay, that's great. And one last question for Dave is, how does future demand look for tickets on Qantas?
Yeah, good question. It's been surprisingly strong for us. That was sort of the unknown when we first started our flights back. And so out of the US, it's been extremely strong from both sides, from Australia and from North America. It's interesting, where we saw the most demand was out of London back to Sydney. And, you know, we were operating nonstop from London to Perth, which we can't do now because Western Australia is closed. So we're going to switch that flight to Darwin, and it'll make a stop in Darwin. Passengers can get off the plane. They can't leave the airport. They can reboard, fuel up, and go on to Sydney. So we're going to have that operating for a while until Perth opens up. But it's been extremely strong. And the one thing I think that little concerns me a bit about the North America market is it's been so long that we haven't been flying, and Australia has been closed. There's a real need to build the Australian brand back up as a destination. So we're going to be working closely with our travel agency partners and tourism boards, just to remind Americans and Canadians of what a great destination it is and why they need to travel there. And I think that's going to be important over the next few months, especially when it opens up, because many Americans have chosen to go to other destinations that opened a bit earlier.
Well, I think on this call, at least, most of our attendees are strong advocates of travel to Australia. So you can start with us as a converted audience already. So thank you, Dave and Zjantelle, for your generosity, not just the time that you spent with us tonight, but in preparing your updates and all of the research that you've done in keeping us up to date. It's greatly appreciated. And we look forward to our next update, which I'm sure will be more good news in time for the holidays.